I remember the sound before the pain, the sharp click of her stiletto heel against the floor, a rhythm that always made me flinch even before I saw her face. That night, it became something more. My mother didn't just walk into the room. She stormed in like a force of nature, her heels echoing with every step, each one a warning shot. I was sitting on the couch, vulnerable, unsure of what would set her off this time. But before I could even ask, before I could even understand, she lifted her foot and brought it down on me. The heel pierced into my ankle with a sickening crunch, and my world spun in a blur of pain. I screamed, but she didn't stop. She didn't rush to help me, didn't apologize, didn't panic. She looked me in the eye, cold and almost proud, and said words that would haunt me forever. "You need to learn how to walk." I couldn't believe it. My ankle throbbed, swelling instantly, my mind reeling between shock and betrayal. She didn't see me as her daughter at that moment. She saw me as someone who had to be broken to be taught. And the terrifying part? She believed it. That night marked the beginning of a wound that went deeper than broken bones. It was the start of me questioning everything I thought I knew about family, about safety, about love. How could a mother, the one person meant to protect you, deliver that kind of cruelty and still believe it was for your own good? This is the story of how a single stomp fractured not just my ankle, but my entire sense of trust. I was 27 when it finally became clear that the relationship with my mother was something far darker than I had ever wanted to admit. People often imagine abuse as screaming matches or bruises hidden under long sleeves. But what if I told you it can also come in silence, in carefully chosen words, and in one devastating moment that changes everything? The night she stomped on my ankle wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was the culmination of years of subtle manipulation, impossible expectations, and punishments that never seemed to fit the so-called mistakes I made. Growing up, I was taught to believe her harshness was love, that her strictness was for my own good. But love doesn't crush bones. Love doesn't stand over you, watching you writhe in pain, and call it a lesson. Telling this story isn't easy. I've carried the shame and confusion for years, wondering if I had somehow deserved it, if maybe I was too weak, too clumsy, too ungrateful. But now, I know better. And I want to share it, not just to free myself from silence, but because I know there are others who've been told that pain equals discipline, that cruelty equals care. If you've ever questioned whether the way someone treats you is normal, if you've ever felt torn between loyalty and survival, this story is for you. Because sometimes the people we're told to trust the most are the very ones who hurt us the deepest. So stay with me as I walk you through what really happened, how it broke me, and how piece by piece I tried to put myself back together. And before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe, because this isn't just my story, it's a reminder that no one should ever suffer in silence. When I look back on my childhood, it almost feels like I was raised in two separate houses, even though we never moved. One was the house the neighbors saw, perfectly trimmed lawn, my mother smiling politely at barbecues, me always dressed neatly for school. The other was the house inside, where the smiles disappeared the moment the door shut, where words cut deeper than knives, and where silence could be a punishment worse than yelling. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people envied. On the inside, I learned early on that appearances mattered more than truth. My mother had a way of controlling every detail. If my hair wasn't brushed the exact way she wanted, she would redo it with a grip so tight that my scalp burned. If I hesitated when she asked me to speak in front of relatives, she would pinch my arm hard enough to leave marks, whispering through clenched teeth that I was embarrassing her. To anyone else, she was a perfectionist mother raising a polite daughter. To me, she was a storm I never knew how to prepare for. I grew up waiting for her moods to shift, like walking on eggshells scattered across every room of the house. The lessons she taught me weren't spoken in gentle bedtime stories. They were etched into me through punishment and pressure. When I brought home a report card with all A's except for one B, she looked at me with disdain and said, "Perfection is the only acceptable standard." I was 8 years old, holding back tears, but I nodded because what else could I do? It wasn't that I feared disappointing her. It was that I feared what disappointment might cost me. A slammed door, a day of silence, or worse, the unpredictable punishments that could turn physical. There were moments when I tried to convince myself that maybe she did love me, just in her own way. She would occasionally buy me clothes or bake my favorite cake, and for a few hours, I could almost believe in the version of her that the world admired. But those moments never lasted. They were like bait on a hook, keeping me tangled in hope, making me believe that if I just behaved better, studied harder, or smiled wider, I would unlock the version of my mother that was kind. That illusion kept me tethered to her approval, even as I crumbled inside. I remember one incident so vividly, it still makes my stomach twist. I was 10 years old, and we were in a shoe store. I saw a pair of sparkly sneakers that I loved, and I dared to ask if I could try them on. Her face hardened instantly. "You're not here to want things," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You're here to learn that life doesn't give you what you like. You take what you're given." I put the sneakers back without another word, my throat burning as if I had swallowed my own desires. That day, I realized that even my wants were dangerous around her. As I grew older, her methods only became sharper. By the time I was a teenager, I had perfected the art of silence. I spoke less, questioned nothing, and obeyed as quickly as possible. But even silence didn't protect me. She found ways to criticize everything. The way I walked, the way I laughed, the way I chewed my food. "You're clumsy," she would snap when I tripped. "You'll never be taken seriously if you can't even control yourself." Those words burrowed deep, shaping the way I saw myself. Instead of rebelling like most teenagers, I shrank smaller and smaller, convinced I was always one misstep away from humiliation. There were rare times when I tried to fight back, little sparks of defiance that quickly fizzled under her gaze. Once, I asked her why she never said she was proud of me. She laughed, cold and sharp, and said, "Pride makes people weak. You don't need praise, you need discipline." The sting of that moment stayed with me, a constant reminder that love in our house wasn't spoken in affirmations, but in corrections, criticisms, and consequences. And I carried that belief into adulthood, mistaking cruelty for guidance long after I left home. Still, the abuse wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the silence that did the most damage. Entire dinners would pass where she refused to look at me, her silence stretching like a wall I couldn't climb. I would sit there, eating carefully, afraid that the scrape of my fork might set her off. That silence told me I was invisible, that I wasn't worth acknowledgement. And in some ways, that silence was worse than the shouting. It made me believe I was simply unworthy of being seen. What I didn't realize back then was that her behavior wasn't just about control. It was about rewriting my reality. She wanted me to believe that pain was necessary, that suffering was a lesson, and that her cruelty was a form of love. And for years, I did believe it. I thought every child's home felt like a battlefield. Every mother's love came with bruises, and every family had secrets they had to hide. I didn't know any different, so I convinced myself it was normal. Looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before that night with the heel. Each cutting word, each cruel glance, each moment of withheld affection was preparing me for the ultimate blow. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow erosion of everything that made me feel safe, until safety itself was foreign. And when she finally stomped down and shattered my ankle, it wasn't just an accident of rage. It was the inevitable outcome of years of small, deliberate breaks. But at the time, I didn't know that the worst was still waiting for me. The night it happened, the air in the house already felt heavy, the kind of heaviness that told me something was about to go wrong. My mother had been pacing for hours, the sharp click of her heels echoing across the hardwood floors like a ticking clock. I sat on the couch with my legs tucked beneath me, pretending to watch television, but every nerve in my body was tuned to her movements. I knew better than to ask what was wrong. Questions only added fuel to the fire. All I could do was sit in silence and hope the storm would pass without finding me. Her footsteps grew louder as she entered the living room, her eyes locking onto me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. She didn't say a word at first. She just stared, as if searching for something to criticize. My heart raced, and I felt my throat tighten. Then, without warning, she marched toward me, her heels striking the floor like a countdown. I barely had time to flinch before she lifted her foot and brought it crashing down on my ankle. The sound was sharp, sickening, like a branch snapping under too much weight. Pain exploded through my leg, so sudden and unbearable that I couldn't even breathe. For a moment the world blurred, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my ears. I screamed, grabbing my ankle instinctively, but she didn't flinch. She stood over me, her face twisted in something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. And then she said it, words that still echo in my mind whenever I close my eyes. "You need to learn how to walk." Those words didn't make sense at first. They felt surreal, disconnected from the agony coursing through my body. Learn to walk? I was 27 years old. I knew how to walk. But in her mind, my pain was a lesson, a punishment disguised as guidance. I looked up at her through tears, hoping to see even a flicker of regret, some sign that she realized what she had done. Instead, her eyes were cold, detached, as if she were observing an experiment. I begged her to call for help, but she shook her head slowly, almost mocking me. "Crying won't fix anything. You need to get stronger." The words pierced me more deeply than the heel itself. Stronger? Wasn't I already strong for surviving years of her cruelty? Wasn't enduring her silence, her insults, her impossible standards enough proof of strength? But in her twisted logic, strength meant obedience, silence, and endurance without complaint. And now, strength meant standing up with a broken ankle. I tried to move, but the pain shot up my leg like fire. I sobbed, clutching the arm of the couch, feeling like a child again, powerless and small. She didn't offer a hand, didn't kneel to comfort me. She just stood there, watching me writhe, as if my suffering validated something in her. It was as though she wanted to see how much I could take before breaking completely. And that realization hit harder than the stomp itself. This wasn't about discipline, it was about control. Eventually, I dragged myself onto the couch, sweat and tears mixing as the swelling grew worse. My ankle was already turning purple, throbbing with every heartbeat. She finally broke the silence, saying in a flat tone, "Don't exaggerate, it's just a bruise, you'll walk it off." Her dismissal was almost more painful than the injury. She had crushed bone, yet dismissed it as weakness. In that moment, I realized that in her eyes, my pain was never valid. It was always minimized, always reframed as my fault. Hours passed, and she didn't take me to the hospital. I lay there, biting down on my lip to keep from screaming, while she carried on with her night as if nothing had happened. She made herself tea, called a friend, even laughed on the phone while I struggled to breathe through waves of agony. The contrast was unbearable. Her normalcy against my torment. It was the clearest sign yet that my suffering was invisible to her, or worse, entertaining. When I finally managed to crawl to my room, I replayed her words over and over. "You need to learn how to walk." I tried to make sense of them, tried to twist them into something less cruel. Maybe she meant I needed to be more careful. Maybe it was her way of teaching resilience. But deep down, I knew the truth. She didn't say it to teach me. She said it to justify breaking me. And the terrifying part was that a piece of me believed her. After years of conditioning, part of me wondered if maybe I really did deserve it. That night, lying in bed with my ankle swollen and my mind racing, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit before. This wasn't love distorted. This wasn't tough parenting. This wasn't discipline. This was abuse, raw and undeniable. And once I saw it for what it was, I couldn't unsee it. But seeing the truth was only the first step. The question I wasn't ready to face yet was whether I had the strength to escape it. The morning after the stomp, the pain in my ankle was unbearable. I could barely move without gasping, every slight shift sending shockwaves through my leg. My mother didn't acknowledge it. She swept through the kitchen like it was any other day, humming while she poured her coffee, while I sat at the table with my foot swollen and bruised beyond recognition. When I asked again if I could see a doctor, she looked at me with that sharp disdain that always made me feel small. "Doctors are for people who can't handle life," she said, sipping her coffee like she hadn't shattered part of me the night before. I wanted to scream at her, to demand help, but the fear was stronger than the rage. Years of conditioning kept me silent, convincing me that speaking up would only make things worse. So instead, I dragged myself through the day, trying to hide my limp, pretending I wasn't in agony. Each step was a reminder of what had happened. Each glance at my mother, a reminder that I couldn't count on her for even the most basic care. The realization was crushing. I was on my own, even in her house. By the third day, I couldn't deny it anymore. The swelling hadn't gone down, and the pain was sharper than ever. I knew something was seriously wrong, but admitting that out loud felt dangerous. Still, I managed to sneak out when she wasn't paying attention, hobbling down the street until I could catch a bus to the nearest urgent care. The nurse took one look at my ankle, and her eyes softened with concern. Within an hour, the X-rays confirmed it, a fracture. The words made my stomach drop, not because of the diagnosis, but because it proved how severe my mother's actions had been. The doctor asked me how it happened. For a second, I froze. The truth sat on my tongue, heavy and bitter, but I couldn't let it out. I was terrified of what would happen if anyone found out. What if they called her? What if she punished me worse? So I lied. I told them I had tripped on the stairs. The doctor nodded, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Still, he didn't press me. He wrapped my ankle in a cast, gave me crutches, and handed me instructions for recovery. I thanked him quietly, my voice trembling, then walked, or rather hobbled, back into a world that had no idea what I was really living through. Going home was the hardest part. As soon as my mother saw the cast, she rolled her eyes. "Pathetic," she muttered, shaking her head. "Now you're going to limp around the house like a victim." She didn't ask about the doctor's words, didn't care about the fracture. Instead, she seemed irritated by the inconvenience of my injury, as if I had ruined her routine by daring to break. I swallowed the hurt, but inside, something cracked even deeper than bone. Her reaction confirmed what I had feared all along. My pain was nothing to her. The days that followed were a blur of frustration and humiliation. I struggled with basic tasks, like getting up the stairs or carrying a plate to the table, while she watched with thinly veiled contempt. "Look at you," she sneered once, as I clumsily maneuvered with crutches. "Can't even walk without turning it into a performance." Every word dug deeper into my skin, making me wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I deserved this. The line between her voice and my own thoughts blurred until I couldn't tell which was which. But at night, when I was alone in my room, the silence told me the truth. I would stare at my cast, at the evidence of what she had done, and the shame would twist inside me. I knew this wasn't normal. I knew mothers weren't supposed to break their daughters. Yet the fear kept me chained. Who would believe me if I told them? To the outside world, she was charming, disciplined, respected. I was just the daughter who made mistakes. The weight of that isolation pressed on me harder than the cast itself. Friends asked what happened, and I repeated the lie I'd told the doctor. I fell on the stairs. They nodded, some showing sympathy, others brushing it off as clumsiness. Every time I said it, I felt a little piece of myself slip further away. The lie protected me, but it also imprisoned me. I was covering for the person who had hurt me, giving her the shield she didn't deserve. But I couldn't stop. The thought of exposing her was terrifying. What if she found out? What if the world turned on me instead of her? The weeks of recovery dragged on, filled with pain both physical and emotional. But as my ankle slowly healed, something unexpected began to shift inside me. For the first time, I started questioning, not just her, but the beliefs she had planted in me all these years. Maybe I wasn't weak. Maybe enduring wasn't the same as being strong. Maybe what she called lessons were actually weapons. The questions swirled in my head, unsettling but liberating, like cracks forming in a wall I had thought unbreakable. And yet, even with those cracks, fear still ruled me. I wasn't ready to stand against her. I wasn't ready to call it abuse out loud, but deep inside, I knew the truth was waiting for me, pressing closer with every passing day. Because if my mother could break my bones and still call it love, what else was she capable of? As the weeks turned into months, the cast finally came off, but the injury lingered in ways the doctor hadn't prepared me for. My ankle healed slowly, but my mind refused to let go of the moment it broke. Every time I tried to put weight on my foot, I felt a rush of panic, as if her heel were coming down on me again. The physical pain faded, but the fear remained, like a phantom wound. I realized then that her violence had carved itself into me more deeply than any fracture ever could. I started having nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat, convinced I could still hear the sharp echo of her stilettos across the floor. My heart would pound, my breath would come in gasps, and for minutes I would sit frozen, staring at the door, half expecting her to walk in. Sleep became something I dreaded, because it always dragged me back into the moment I most wanted to forget. Even during the day, certain sounds, the click of heels, the slam of a door, sent me spiraling. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, reminding me that trauma doesn't wait for permission to surface. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, with anything that would keep me outside the house, but even then, the weight of her presence followed me. Whenever someone got too close, I pulled away. I didn't know how to trust anymore. If my own mother could betray me in such a brutal way, how could I believe that anyone else wouldn't eventually do the same? I avoided dating altogether, convinced that intimacy was just another doorway to pain. I wore my mistrust like armor, but inside I felt hollow. Friends noticed the change in me, but I brushed off their concern. "I'm fine," I would say with a practiced smile. Inside, though, I was unraveling. I couldn't tell them the truth, couldn't risk exposing the secret I had carried for so long. To them, my mother was still the polite woman they'd seen at gatherings, the one who asked about their families and offered them cookies. No one would have believed that behind closed doors, that same woman had crushed her daughter's ankle and called it a lesson. The disconnect between her public mask and my private reality left me feeling invisible, trapped in a life no one else could see. There were moments when I thought about cutting her off completely, about packing my things and leaving without a word. But then the fear would rise again, whispering that I couldn't survive without her, that no one else would want me, that I was too weak to stand on my own. Those weren't just my thoughts. They were her words, etched into me from years of conditioning. She had built her control so carefully that even in her absence, her voice still ruled me. Escaping her wasn't as simple as walking out the door. It meant dismantling the version of myself she had created. The more I reflected, the more I realized that her abuse wasn't confined to the heel that broke my ankle. It was in every criticism that shaped my self-image, every silence that made me feel unworthy, every lesson that taught me to doubt myself. That stomp was just the climax of a lifetime of being chipped away, piece by piece, until I barely recognized who I was. And the scariest part was that a piece of me still craved her approval. Even as I hated what she had done, I longed for her to look at me with something other than contempt. That contradiction tore me apart. One afternoon, while limping across the living room, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, older than 27. My shoulders slumped as if the weight of her words still pressed down on me. For a long time, I just stared at myself, wondering who I would be without her shadow. Could I even exist outside of her control? Or had she broken me so completely that independence was nothing more than a dream? The questions haunted me, but they also planted something new, an ember of possibility. That ember grew when I started reading about trauma, scrolling late at night through articles about toxic families, narcissistic parents, and cycles of abuse. For the first time, I saw my life reflected back at me in words that weren't my own. I wasn't alone. Others had lived through similar horrors. Others had carried the same confusion, shame, and fear. And some of them had escaped. Their stories terrified me, but they also gave me hope. Maybe survival wasn't just about enduring. Maybe survival could mean leaving. Still, leaving felt impossible. The thought of confronting her, of severing the bond completely, sent me into a spiral of panic. My entire life had been built around her approval, her rules, her presence. Walking away felt like stepping into an abyss with no guarantee of solid ground. But staying meant suffocating slowly, pretending that a broken ankle was just an accident, pretending that my mother's cruelty was love. Both choices terrified me, but one thing was becoming clearer each day. Pretending was no longer sustainable. I didn't know when or how I would finally choose, but the question gnawed at me relentlessly. Could I find the strength to break away from the person who had broken me? Or would fear keep me chained forever to the woman who taught me pain as if it were a language I was destined to speak for life? The answer was still out of reach, but I knew one thing for certain. The moment of decision was coming, and once it arrived, there would be no turning back. The breaking point didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It came slowly, like water dripping onto stone, until the surface finally cracked. After months of trying to pretend I was fine, the weight of silence became unbearable. Every room in that house reminded me of what she had done, of the sound of her heel shattering my ankle. I could feel the imprint of her control in every corner, in every look she gave me. It wasn't just my body that had healed wrong, it was my spirit, bent and twisted under years of her pressure. Something inside me whispered that if I didn't leave soon, I might never leave at all. The thought terrified me. Leaving meant stepping into a world I didn't trust, a world she had taught me was dangerous and unkind. But staying meant giving her the power to break me again, maybe in ways that would never heal. I started small, testing my courage in quiet ways. I researched apartments, saved bits of money without her noticing, and whispered to myself late at night, "You deserve more than this." At first, the words felt like lies, but the more I repeated them, the more they started to sound like a truth I could reach for. One evening, she lashed out at me for leaving a glass on the counter. Her words were sharp, dripping with contempt. But this time, something was different. Instead of shrinking into myself, I felt a strange calm. Her insults still hurt, but they no longer pierced me the way they used to. I realized that I was already halfway out the door in my mind, and that thought gave me strength. She didn't know it yet, but her control was slipping. The chains she had forged over decades were finally beginning to rust. Still, guilt clung to me like a second skin. Walking away from a mother, no matter how cruel, felt like betraying something sacred. I remembered the rare moments of softness, the cake she once baked, the occasional smile, the fleeting glimpses of a woman who might have been different if life had shaped her another way. Those memories tugged at me, whispering that maybe I should give her another chance. But then I would remember the pain, the silence, the heel crushing my bone, and I knew chances had already been wasted. Love shouldn't have to be proven through suffering. The day I finally decided was unremarkable in every outward sense. There was no fight, no shouting, just another evening of cold indifference. She sat watching television, ignoring me as I moved quietly through the house. But inside, something shifted. I looked at her and understood with startling clarity that she would never change. She didn't want to, and if I stayed, I would lose myself completely. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. For the first time, I felt like I had permission, from myself, not from her, to walk away. I packed slowly over the next week, hiding my bags in the back of my closet. Every folded shirt, every zipped pocket felt like a declaration of independence. My heart raced each time I imagined her discovering my plan, but the fear didn't stop me. I was done living in the shadow of her rage. The thought of freedom scared me, but it also filled me with a quiet kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. I began to imagine a life where I could laugh without fear, where I could walk without flinching at the sound of footsteps behind me. The morning I left, the house was silent. She was still asleep, and I knew I couldn't face her. Not yet. My hands trembled as I carried the bags to the door, each step heavier than the last. My ankle still ached sometimes, a dull reminder of what had been taken from me. But that day the pain felt like fuel. It was proof of why I had to go. I took one last look at the house, the walls that had held both my childhood and my torment, and I whispered a quiet goodbye. Not to her, but to the version of myself that had been trapped there. Walking out wasn't easy. Every step away from that house was a battle between fear and freedom. I kept expecting her voice to call after me, demanding I return, reminding me that I was nothing without her. But the only sound was the echo of my own footsteps, steady and determined. For the first time, I wasn't walking to please her or to avoid punishment. I was walking for me, and even though my body still carried the scars, my spirit felt lighter with each passing block. As I closed the door on that chapter of my life, I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be simple. Healing isn't linear, and the voice of my mother would linger in my head long after her physical presence was gone. But I also knew that every day I chose myself, every day I built a life outside her control, was a day I proved her wrong. She had stomped on my ankle and told me I needed to learn how to walk. What she didn't realize was that leaving her behind was the first real step I had ever taken. And though fear still lingered in my chest, I sensed that the hardest part wasn't the leaving itself. It was learning how to live after I was finally free. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder how I managed to survive those years. The broken ankle was only the most visible wound, but the invisible ones ran far deeper. They lived in the way I doubted myself, in the way I flinched at kindness, in the way I believed cruelty was the price of love. For so long, I carried those scars in silence, convinced that if I spoke them aloud, no one would understand. But the truth is, silence only kept me chained to her story. Walking away didn't magically heal me. The day I left, I felt equal parts liberated and terrified. Freedom is complicated when you've been trained to fear it. For months, I struggled with guilt, with questions that echoed late at night. Was I a terrible daughter? Did I abandon her? Should I have stayed longer, tried harder, loved more fiercely? It took time and help for me to understand that none of those questions mattered. The only real question was whether I wanted to keep living in pain, or whether I was ready to claim a life of my own. Slowly, step by step, I began to rebuild. I went to therapy, where I learned that what I had endured had a name: abuse. Putting that word to my experience was like turning on a light in a dark room. It made everything clearer, less confusing, less tangled in the web of self-blame I had carried for years. Therapy taught me that love should never hurt, that discipline should never leave scars, and that strength isn't measured by how much pain you can endure, but by how much courage you have to change your life. Healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt strong and hopeful, and others when the weight of memories pulled me back under. But even on the hardest days, I reminded myself that I was no longer trapped in that house, no longer waiting for the sound of her heels to dictate the rhythm of my heartbeat. Every small act of independence, cooking for myself, paying my own bills, laughing without fear, became a victory. They were the steps she once told me I needed to learn, but this time they were mine. And that's why I'm sharing my story here. Not for sympathy, not for pity, but because I know there are others out there who have been told that pain equals love, that suffering equals strength. Maybe you're carrying secrets that feel too heavy to name. Maybe you're questioning whether what you've lived is bad enough to count as abuse. Let me tell you this: if it hurt you, if it broke you, if it made you feel small and voiceless, it matters. Your pain is real, your story matters, and you are not alone. If you take anything from my journey, let it be this: you don't have to wait for someone else to validate your suffering before you decide you deserve better. Leaving doesn't mean you're weak. Speaking out doesn't make you ungrateful. Choosing yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. And survival, in its truest form, is the most powerful act of love you can ever give to yourself. So if you're listening to this and feeling that spark inside you, that whisper that says you deserve more, hold on to it. It might be small now, but it's enough to start. And when the fear feels overwhelming, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. Thank you for walking through my story with me, for holding space for the pain and the healing alike. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories of survival, of resilience, of finding light after darkness, please subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps these stories reach someone who might need to hear them at the exact moment they feel most alone. Together, we can remind each other that even after the deepest fractures, it is possible to stand, to walk, and eventually, to run toward freedom.